Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Pod. Nick Whalen, Alex Barutha here with you, as we have been, every Monday since, I don't even know, late August, September? It's flown by, man. We're
For the
already
past
now
5 years.
It's been, well, yeah, I mean, the schedule's bumped around. Yeah, I've talked to you about basketball at least once a week, if not significantly more than that for, the greater portion of the last 10 years. I'll say that. We got a lot to talk about, man. Round one is officially over. Round two is already underway. Some of these series, like the timing's been all over the place. Like I have no idea why the OKC series doesn't start until tomorrow. And yet, by that point, we'll be on the cusp of, game three already between Denver and Minnesota. But we'll get to that in a moment. We'll talk about what we saw in game one, little game seven, some post-mortem, I should say, for the Orlando Magic. Although we'll talk a lot more about that with Orlando Magic insider Brandon Kravitz later this week. First and foremost, we're brought to you by Prize Picks. It's the best way to get action in on sports in more than 30 states across the country. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks. I can submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. You just pick more or less on two or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Looking at the board tonight, Alex, Dante DiVincenzo is who stands out to me. His points prop at most books right now, 15.5. That's the projection over at Prize Picks as well. I like the more on 15.5 for DiVincenzo. I think, especially with no Bogdanovic, especially with Tibbs at times being a little bit reticent to use Miles McBride, I think this is the 40-plus minute night for DiVincenzo. He's cooked against the Pacers throughout the regular season. He's gone over this number in 2 or 3, including, I think, a 38-point performance, or maybe it was 34 against the Pacers earlier in the year. He's attempting 13 threes per game against Indiana this season. And, a chunk of those games came before that late season stretch when he was basically their number one option for a while. So Dante DiVincenzo, more than 15.5 points. That's one of my favorite plays tonight. Go check out all the offerings over at Prize Picks. I know a lot of people are all over this Andrew Nembhard, more than 18 points, rebounds, assists. That is the most popular play right now over at Prize Picks, but go check it out. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, huge selection of players and stats. That's what makes Prize Picks the best daily fantasy sports app. If you go download the Prize Picks app today, or just go to prizepicks.com, you can play there as well. Put in our code ROTOPOD, ROTOPOD. That'll get you a first deposit match up to $100. That's ROTOPOD, ROTOPOD, for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy over at Prize Picks. All right, man. We got a lot to break down here. I've been looking forward to doing this pod with you. Where do you want to begin? Do you want to start to preview some of these round two series? Do you want to dive in on Denver, Minnesota right away? You and I are also involved, by the way, in an industry 2024-25 mock draft, fantasy draft, which we'll be touching on later in the show. So stay tuned for that. But I'll defer to you. I've been talking for like 3 minutes straight. So wherever you want to go, I will follow.
I got a message this morning from HR that because of a payroll error, I will be earning an extra $7 this year. So maybe I'll deposit that directly into my Prize Picks account with a bet to be named later. Let's start with Minnesota, Denver, just because I rewatched the game this morning. Pulled a Ryan Russillo, took some notes.
I love it.
This game was amazing. I'm gonna start with this because it feels sort of irrelevant in a way, so I want to get out of the way. But I felt like the refs kind of gave away 2 bizarre technical fouls. Like one to Ant and one to Jamal Murray. And I felt like they had sort of like, they're already feeling the pressure. Like they're already swallowing the whistle. Ant got absolutely hacked on like one play towards the rim. Nobody called it. This is just pretty ridiculous. My initial takeaway, like grand scope, was that I felt like the Nuggets had some defensive breakdowns. Like I felt like Minnesota was getting easier looks. The main story, of course, is like Anthony Edwards going for 43 and just looking completely unstoppable. Like Denver has nobody to deal with him. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, as a whole, I saw Jokic make some defensive breakdowns. Aaron Gordon got blown by Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns at different points. Mm-hmm. And they're gonna have to figure it out for game 2. Otherwise, Minnesota will continue to take it to them.
Yeah, it was a shocking game, not necessarily in the result, right? I don't think it's that crazy to me that Minnesota went in and stole game 1. I think we knew this would be a close series, but after what we saw from Denver in the Lakers series, time and time again, come back from these early deficits. They were down 18-4 early in this game, and then led by the end of the first quarter. I mean, it was it was kind of the classic Denver rope-a-dope of like, all right, what's going on here? And then they get it going. It's back and forth for most of the second half. And, even when Minnesota, I think, was up like 4 to 6 points with, 2-3 minutes left, you're just kind of waiting for Denver to start hitting those shots that were going down over and over and over, start getting those stops that were happening against the Lakers. And I think the first thing that came to my mind is like, this isn't the Lakers anymore. Like it's not Prince out there bricking a wide open three. It's not Rui Hachimura blowing a layup. The Timberwolves are a better team. They're a better coach team. They have guys who you can rely on coming off the bench. Like the Lakers never got anything like the Naz Reid game that we saw yesterday in that series, right? Like Naz Reid, I think in a lot of ways won the Timberwolves this game. Yes, Anthony Edwards went for 43. I thought Mike Conley was really good in his role. I thought Karl Anthony Towns, despite just having a few Townsy plays, he had 5 fouls. He actually ended up being pretty good for them as well. But Naz Reid starts cold, comes in, finishes with 16 points. I believe 14 of those were in a quarter, 2 of 4 from beyond the arc, hit a huge 3 late in the game to expand the Timberwolves lead. I think Minnesota coming in there, they were certainly the underdog. The odds indicated that. The way the series was talked about indicated that. I truly don't believe Minnesota views itself as an underdog. I think they are right there with the Denver Nuggets. And honestly, personnel-wise, I think they deserve to feel that way. I think Denver was a better team if you just look at the roster. I think they had a better roster last year than they do this year. And their best player is still better than Minnesota's best player, as great as Anthony Edwards has been. But after that, it's not like Denver has this insane talent advantage. And we talked about that on the pod last week when we were going through, the best teams of the decade. It's like, yeah, Denver deserves to be in that conversation. But when you just look at the roster compared to other great teams in their era and compared to other great teams from the last couple of decades, it's not like they have this team, loaded with future Hall of Famers.
Jamal Murray has never made an all-star team.
He has not.
And he's their second best player, to your point. Yeah, I think, well, you mentioned the Nuggets pulling away from the Lakers late in games when they were close. And I feel like we all sort of took that as a sign of like, oh, the Nuggets, they'll rope-a-dope you, and then at the very end they pull away. Should we have actually taken that as more of a warning sign that they were like the Lakers hang around every single game, basically?
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I also think there's been a lot of, backpedaling on the Lakers, and, I think the Lakers themselves, kind of throwing out the intimation that, look, we were right there. We led for 80% of the series, which I do think the Lakers are a really good team. I think they would have beat almost any other team, maybe not Minnesota, but just about any other team in round one. But no, you're right. I think that is the other way to look at it. In some ways it's, credit to Denver for finding ways to win this game. But if you're the best team in your conference, if you're maybe the best team in the NBA, how are you trailing 5 games in a row in a playoff series, right? And I think continuing to put yourself in that position as the opponents get more and more difficult and the coaching and the late game execution gets more and more competent, yeah, it shouldn't be a surprise to us that they were tripped up in the way they were. We should say, by the way, as we continue to dive in on this series, Rudy Gobert, due to a personal issue, I believe that the birth of his child, very much questionable to play tonight, was not at shoot around. As of right now, we still have no idea if he's going to be out there. Obviously, that would be a crucial piece missing for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And we've seen the 6.5 point favorites. It's tough for me to judge just, what quite the same explosiveness. I didn't think in game 1 against Minnesota. And, it was in somewhat of foul trouble, by his standards. He finished with 4 fouls. I think 3 were in the first half, but only 34 minutes for Jamal Murray in game 1.
Yeah, I mean, so something I wrote down was, to me, I felt like the Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon minutes were sort of paired together. Like I think it was early in the first quarter, Mike Malone takes out both Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray and brings in...
Yeah, we saw some Justin Holiday first quarter action.
Brings in some Reggie Jackson and some Justin Holiday. And Jackson came out hot, confident, looked spry. And Holiday also played pretty well where, because of what Minnesota was doing defensively, where they're putting Towns on Jokic and having Rudy play backside help floating off of Aaron Gordon, that creates a lot of issues for Jokic. So then they basically bring in Justin Holiday, a 3-point shooter. Now Minnesota can't go with that game plan because they have to guard on the perimeter because because Denver's playing 5 out. And I felt like that really energized the Nuggets. It helped the spacing. And I'm not going to go as far as to say Reggie Jackson played better than Jamal Murray. Like Reggie Jackson played 14 minutes, 5 points, 1 assist, right? Jamal Murray had 17 and 4. at the same time, I felt Reggie Jackson's presence on the court way more than I really felt like Jamal Murray was affecting the game.
Yeah, you mentioned the Aaron Gordon piece, and I think Minnesota essentially being willing to just leave him alone, much in the way that the Lakers did. But I think even more of an extreme case in this round, that's a pretty big advantage for them. A team that already has advantages on defense. They have one of the 3 to 5 best perimeter versatile defender types in the NBA in Jaden McDaniels, who, by the way, they did not have for this series last year. And this was kind of the quintessential McDaniels game, right? Like played extremely well on defense, did everything he does there, grabbed 8 rebounds, scoreless on 0 of 7 shooting, right? And Minnesota still wins this game. Like they got very little from Gobert offensively. He only took 6 shots, had 6 points, did have one just backbreaking, like little, I don't even know what you call it, like a floater jump shot with.
He looked like he looked like he was taking a jump shot at a Papa shot in a bar. You know, like one of those bar games, but when you actually take like a real jump shot on it, that's what it looked like Gobert did.
That's exactly the description. Yes. If you have not watched it, just picture yourself playing Papa shot, because that's what it looked like. Bank that one in. But going back to what I said about Aaron Gordon, I mean, he didn't make the Lakers pay. He certainly did not make Minnesota pay in game 1. I mean, he's hit 1-3 over his 6 playoff games so far. And, it's not like he's ever been a great shooter, but I do feel like in the past, and the numbers bear that out, that he was at least somewhat of a threat last season. And the fact that Denver's just clearly not even looking for that, it's like, I don't know if he's lost confidence. I don't know if if this is something they've talked about and they feel like they could get better looks elsewhere, but it just seems like they're not making teams pay for completely leaving one of your, in theory, 3 or 4 best players on the floor. And I tried to find ways to get Aaron Gordon, try to activate Aaron Gordon in this series is going to be huge. I mean, he's got 23 total points over his last 3 games.
Yeah, Gordon's game has completely changed. And I do feel like there are some guys who, I mean, he's basically asked, hey, we're gonna bulk you up. We're gonna have you play crazy defense inside. We're gonna have you catch lobs, play super physical. And I feel like we underrate how difficult it is for a lot of those guys to do that, and also to begin with. And yeah, I mean, when I am imagining like what is the immediate adjustment Denver has to make, I think first of all, they got to clean up whatever they were doing defensively. I mean, there was some possession where Jokic was literally guarding nobody and just standing in the middle of the paint. Yeah. Someone gets an open 3. There were 2 guys guarding a guy who didn't have the ball. Some weird stuff was going on there. And they don't have an answer for Anthony Edwards, a one-on-one at least. But part of me thinks that they are probably going to try more Justin Holiday, maybe some more Christian Brown and Peyton Watson, instead of Aaron Gordon. Like, maybe they'll try different actions with Gordon. Maybe they'll try more handoffs and punish Gobert for sagging off and stuff like that. But like I said, I felt like there was a different sort of energy Denver had offensively when it was Holiday in there instead of Gordon.
I trust that Denver and Mike Malone make those adjustments. I would not be panicking right now if I'm a Nuggets fan, but kind of going back to what you said earlier about how Denver failed to close this game. I mean, it was a 3-point game with about 4.5 left. Jamal Murray, hit a mid-range jumper to pull within 3, and that's kind of the inflection point of the game that especially against the Lakers. That it just felt like, all right, this is the time where. Doesn't matter if they're up 3, down 3. It's like, this is when you push the gas, right? And they become the team that creates the better looks, that gets the stops they need to get, that hits the improbable, Michael Porter Jr. triple covered 3. It's like this is when that part of the game now starts, because that's how it goes for the Nuggets. And I felt like Denver was just a little shell shocked with the fact that, especially that they could not get stops, right? Like they get that Murray shot to pull within 3. Immediately Naz Reid, hits a wide open 3 on the other side. And I think Jokic got a bucket out, or no, Jokic then missed like a 2-footer, which was crazy. You probably saw the play if you rewatched it. I think he kind of had Gobert pinned right at the rim, and it just bounces off, and you're like, I haven't seen Jokic miss that shot in my life, right? Like I think there was a little bit of like, wait, what? This is the time of the game when we're supposed to take over, and for whatever reason that switch just didn't flip in the way that it did last round.
Yeah, there was one play late. Well, at the very end of the game when Anthony Edwards went 94 feet. And just dribbled for a layup. I don't understand what happened there with Denver. I think Denver, like you said, shell shocked, demotivated. Nobody stepped up and tried to stop him. I think they knew the game was over. But I mean, there was one defensive play where I noticed like Anthony Edwards guarded like 3 different people, gets that sick left-handed block in MPJ, and then I think throws it up the floor to Naz Reid, who dunks it. Maybe it was either Reid or Towns.
I think it was Reid.
But Yeah, I mean, Minnesota, look, Anthony Edwards was out of his mind. There were defensive breakdowns, but Edwards was just torching guys one-on-one and making tough shots. Like, it's not like he was blowing by guys and dunking on everybody. Like, he was hitting these tough mid-rangers. He was hitting turnarounds in the post. And there were multiple times in this game where the guy guarding Edwards he was guarding Edwards for like 8 seconds. Like, Edwards is just doing a series of moves, pulls up, either makes the shot or gets fouled. And the end result is the guy who was guarding Edwards just with his hands on his knees, like bent over, gasping for air, like exhausted, just trying to guard Edwards for 8 seconds. And I think that tells you like how ridiculous Edwards is one-on-one, how good a shape he's in, and just how much he's killing it.
He's just huge, man. Dude, that's the other thing. I mean, he's thick, right? And like, I feel like he's almost gotten bigger like over the course of the season. I mean, it's there's nobody
list him at.
Well, I mean, it's like a running back, dude. I mean, there's nobody really that I don't think really moves like him with the speed, the agility, and the power. Like a lot of guys have like 2 of the 3, but not all 3. You know, I think like body comp wise, you're like, oh, maybe kind of Donovan Mitchell. It's like, no, dude, he's blowing right through Donovan Mitchell. Like Donovan Mitchell does not have that same level of strength that Anthony Edwards has. You know, I'm looking at the wide open threes from game 1. Minnesota 3 of 11 on wide open threes. Denver 6 of 13. That's something to monitor. I know you and I have been keying in on that quite a bit, you know, especially in that Indiana Milwaukee series. I'll be very curious to see what kind of quality of looks the Pacers get starting tonight against the Knicks. But last thing we'll say on Minnesota Denver, how do you stop Anthony Edwards? If you're the Nuggets, who's the matchup? Like, is KCP going to get physically overwhelmed by Anthony Edwards? Is Aaron Gordon going to be able to keep up? Like, do they have that guy? Do you start introducing more Peyton Watson, more Justin Holiday? Because at least in terms of length and strength, maybe those guys match up a little better. But you know, not many teams have an Anthony Edwards stopper. I think almost like the Lou Dort body type. You know, the width of Lou Dort. It's like that's the type of guy. But does Denver have that?
I don't think Denver has that guy. For what it's worth, Edwards is listed at 6'4", 225. I feel like he plays taller than that. Like if you would just, I mean, generally know most players' heights, but I would have just been like, he's 6'6". No, he's 6'4". Donovan Mitchell, for reference, is listed an inch shorter and 10 pounds lighter.
Yeah.
I don't, I mean, I think gut reaction is, okay, let's try more Aaron Gordon. I think Edwards is too quick for him. And I also think, I mean, if you pull Aaron Gordon off of Gobert and Towns, then you're going to run into issues. Because Towns can obviously score one-on-one against like MPJ, and Towns is big enough, and Gobert is big enough to just, you know, put the ball up and over those guys. So I think you start getting this weird domino effect. And Justin Holiday is not going to be the answer on that end of the court. That's the problem. It's like, yeah, you can throw him in there for offense to try to scheme around that. You can't guard Ant.
I think you also put yourself in a precarious situation of pulling Aaron Gordon away from the rim. If he's getting blown by, who's at the rim? You know, is it Michael Porter? I don't think that's a good idea. Is it Jokic? Ultimately, that's fine from a pure defensive standpoint. I think Jokic is still a little bit more imposing than he gets credit for, even if he's not a high volume shot blocker. But you also can't have Jokic getting in foul trouble, right? I think that would be right. This team has no backup center, right? Like, do we start to see more? Do we see a little bit more DeAndre Jordan? I don't know. I mean, he moonlit in last year's playoffs every now and then, but they're relying very heavily on basically what they want to do working. And if that doesn't work, this is not a team that has the personnel to present a ton of counters.
No, they don't have sort of mix and match depth. No, you know, like you're alluded to. You know, that was one thing. I mean, the Pelicans got hosed in round 1, but they had mix and match depth. Now, did they use it as well as they could have? I don't know. But that was the one positive about the Pelicans going into the playoffs. You're like, well, this team is deep. They can go a bunch of different looks. Denver doesn't really have too many different looks that they can throw at Minnesota.
Looking at the series prices at DraftKings, the most likely outcome, if we're going by the odds, is Nuggets in 7. That is plus 290. Wolves in 6, plus 350. Nuggets in 6, 5-1. Timberwolves sweep is 6-1. Wolves in 5, 750. Wolves in 7, 8-1. That one's interesting to me. That's actually a pretty good value, I think. Denver in 5 is 8-1 as well. So, while the Timberwolves are technically the series favorites. If you just look at like the series money line right now, which is Wolves minus 125. The book is saying Nuggets at 7. If you're looking for the exact outcome is most likely. So that's a bit of an interesting contradiction. If you were setting the odds, would you make the Timberwolves the favorites right now, just based on the fact that they're up 1-0 and what we saw in game 1?
I don't think so, because I think the expectation has to be Denver comes out and wins game 2 and they have home court in game 7. So I think you give them the home court in game 7 advantage.
Okay.
But I don't think the podcast timing lined up for us to like pick who make picks for the series. I think I would have picked Denver in either 6 or 7, to be honest. I don't think I was necessarily as high on Minnesota as a lot of other people. But this game has opened my eyes a little bit. I'll say that much.
I would have said Denver in 6. I could say that with confidence. I think I would now say Denver in 7. I think you're right. You don't want to overreact to one game, but it didn't feel like an anomaly game to me. There were some of these, it's like where Cleveland comes out and like, they're up like 30 in the early third quarter against Orlando, and you're like, all right, they just got blitzed, whatever. It's kind of a game that got out of hand. Like this felt like a somewhat of an indicative game as far as how live Minnesota is going to be as a dog here. Again, Timberwolves minus 125 to win the series. Nuggets plus 105. Let's talk Knicks Pacers. We'll go a little more quickly through the rest of these series, but Knicks are minus 245 to win the series. Pacers 2-1. If we're looking at game 1 tonight, the Knicks are 5.5 point favorites at home. I like the Knicks here. I really do. I understand can they keep this up? Can you play half of your rotation 46 minutes a night? Do you run out of gas at some point? I understand that. The attrition with no Julius Randle, losing Bogdanovich, some guys just out of this rotation and never coming back seemingly. I keep clinging to this idea that the Pacers are going to be shocked by the energy, the scheming, the pacing, everything that New York does well are kind of things that Milwaukee did not do well for most of round 1. Like good luck not getting 29 wide open threes per game in this series. Like that's not going to happen again. Like I think the shot quality for Indiana, they're going to have to work a lot harder to generate good shots than they did against the Bucks.
I'm 100% with you. I feel like they are in for a world, like a world of pain in this first game with the way that New York is going to guard them. Now I think the counter against that is Indiana. I think these guys in New York, I mean, look, the cardio, the like they are playing so hard. These guys are playing 50 minutes. No substitutions for Tom Thibodeau. I wonder to what extent these guys are just fatigued. And Indiana is going to do everything they can to get up and down the court and just burn these guys' legs out when their legs and their knees might already be burned out after this first round series against Philly. But I do like New York here, especially in game 1, in the Garden, and the contrast of what I think the defense will be compared to what they saw against Milwaukee.
Yeah, I think the Pacers have reason to feel confident that they can compete in the series, and I think they do. Like I don't think the Knicks sweep or anything. I don't think it's out of the question that they could win it in 5. But the Pacers have, I think, more personnel that they're comfortable rolling out. I mean, the Knicks rotation is basically down to 6.5 players right now, and I think what would worry me most is like, all right, what happens if Jalen Brunson rolls his ankle, and even if he doesn't miss time, if he's not 100%, it kind of feels like they need him to be this 35 plus point per game guy every single night. And honestly, I guess the Pacers, I think he can get there. Like, I don't think this is a fantastic defensive team by any means. The question is, do the Pacers get the Obi Toppin series that they got in round 1? Does TJ McConnell come in and have 20 points and 9 assists and 4 steals, like one of the best bench player games we've seen in recent history in the postseason? Can, a rookie and Ben Shepherd continue to knock down open threes? I don't know. I really don't. And I think the Knicks are going to surprise them with the intensity. I think you could prep for it. If you're Rick Carlisle, you're telling these guys like, hey, here's how it's going to be different. I just don't think you can really replicate that series over series. Like the Bucks play a unique style. They were forced into playing that style given the attrition. Half of the series, there were at least 2 players on the court at all times for Milwaukee that you just didn't really have to worry about, whether it's Pat Beverly or Jay Crowder or I don't know. I'm just blanking on all the Bucks who can't do anything. Pat Connaughton, I think, is in that category for most of the series. Milwaukee just didn't present that much in terms of threats. And I'm not saying the Knicks have all these all-star caliber players, but everybody contributes. Like Isaiah Hartenstein took 13 shots in the closeout game. Like you have to respect Isaiah Hartenstein. You have to respect DiVincenzo, Josh Hart, all these guys. OG Anunoby played really well offensively over the last few games. So I think Indiana had it somewhat easy, especially in the games where Milwaukee had no Lillard and no Giannis. It was, all right, either we do everything we can to stop Chris Middleton, or we just let him get his and let these other guys just go out there and miss wide open threes. I don't know if you can get away with that against the Knicks. Like everybody contributes for New York.
Yeah, and I think they match up fairly well. I mean, Siakam was really strong against the Bucks.
Yeah.
But the Knicks are going to counter with OG Anunoby, the former teammate.
Guy.
The perfect guy to be guarding Siakam, and obviously knows probably more than anybody else in terms of guarding Siakam since all the practices and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then I think the Knicks can throw DiVincenzo on Halliburton. To what extent do you have to worry about Nembhard and Nesmith? Probably not that much. I feel pretty comfortable throwing like Brunson on Nembhard and Hart on Nesmith. Miles Turner is going to be an interesting piece in the series because the Knicks really only play traditional bigs. Hartenstein, how much is he going to come out to the 3-point line to guard Turner? How much is Mitchell Robinson going to come out to the 3-point line to guard Turner? And Embiid was shooting threes, and they did fine, but that's more of like what Miles Turner wants to do. Mm-hmm. But I do feel like just one-on-one matchups, like what they can do in the 5-man groups, like the starting lineups, New York has the advantage.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think the Siakam point is a good one. I mean, OG Anunoby is the perfect guy, I think, to prevent Siakam from doing, especially what he did early in the series with 35 and 36 in the first 2 games. I mean, he just owned Bobby Portis for most of that series, and you're not going to do that against OG Anunoby. I mean, I think the other thing, defensively, despite all the advantages that Indiana had throughout the series, Bucks had a 116 offensive rating with no Giannis and with a third of the real Damian Lillard throughout the series. Like that's not great. It's not ideal. And yeah, Milwaukee had the one hot shooting game where Malik Beasley, came in and hit 4 threes, but usually you get a game like that over the course of a series. So I worry a little bit for Indiana defensively. Again, I think it's going to be like, taking an ankle weight off or, removing the donut from the bat before you go up there if you're the Knicks. Like you had this just crazy, chaotic, hard-fought series against Philly, and now you're facing like the fastest-paced team in the NBA. I think things are going to come easier to the Knicks, and I think things are going to come harder for the Pacers compared to what they faced against Milwaukee. In terms of the style, though, in terms of the pace, like I said, Indiana closed the regular season second fastest pace team behind Washington. New York was dead last. Where do you think this settles? Pace is down across the board, in the postseason. So Indiana was at like 101 for the regular season. They were at 93 against Milwaukee in round 1, but the Knicks were even lower, down at about 90. The Pacers want to say, all right, let's get out and run. Can they do that? Can they do it more or less effectively against the Knicks than they did against Milwaukee?
I don't think they're going to be able to do it more effectively than they did against Milwaukee. Milwaukee is not a good transition defense. Like gut check, if you're just asking me like first reaction in the player prop market, like you could just couple blind overs on New York guys, couple blind unders on Pacers guys. For what it's worth, Brunson's player prop is at 36.5 points, which I think is earned. I mean, the pace is going to be faster, and he absolutely he popped off the last 4 games of the series. And then Siakam's at 20.5. I would think about under.
Yeah.
But I think it is going to be. I think New York is going to dictate the pace of the series ultimately.
Knicks actually had more transition points per game in the playoffs or in round 1 than the Pacers did. About the same, but Knicks got them by like 0.3. But Milwaukee 12 points per game in transition. That is unbelievably bad. Very, very bad. So I think. Even if Indiana ends up winning the pace battle to some degree, I think New York's a team that could beat you significantly more in transition than Milwaukee did. So I'm going to go on the record and say the Knicks win this series in 5 games. I'll say Knicks in 5.
Yeah, I was gonna do the same. I was gonna be a little bold. I'll say okay. Knicks in 5 as well.
All right, there we have it. I'm trying to get odds for that. Knicks in 5. Oh wow, plus 310. That is the lowest odds.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Not
If
bad.
you do like the Pacers, by the way, Pacers in 6 is 5-1. Pacers in 7 plus 750. But all right, it's good to see that the DK Sportsbook is aligned with us. Real quick, Boston, Cleveland. I fear for the Cavs here. I think they have delayed the inevitable. Good on them. Come back from an 18-point deficit. I don't know how you fall down 18 at home in an elimination game to a team that only had one player show up yesterday, but good for the Cavs for rallying back. I don't know if Jared Allen is going to be out there for game 1. He's missed 3 in a row. I think that's huge. I think that's really the one advantage you could point to for Cleveland is, all right, no Porzingis for Boston. We start 2 centers. They don't have one of their big men. Maybe there's a way we can exploit this, but I don't know, man. If Jared Allen isn't out there or isn't himself, that advantage to me goes out the window. I think Boston rolls here, and the game 1 line is at 11.5.
I can see Cleveland pulling off a game here, just because almost any team can pull off a game. With the way the NBA work, the 3-point shooting and everything. Miami got a game on Boston. Like, I think if you're Cleveland, it's like we got to get
3 threes.
I know. I think Cleveland could. I mean, hopefully they can have one of those games. I think that has to be their hope. I think Cleveland essentially has no chance. It is concern. I mean, I thought Cleveland was going to beat Orlando in 5. Like, I thought that they were going to just be like Orlando can't score. We have the perfect defensive game plan against them. They're not going to be able to. Nope. Exactly like you said. They go to 7 games against this inexperienced Orlando team that, for the life of them, could barely score 100 points, and Cleveland couldn't match them. And I think now you're going up against a buzzsaw in Boston, who has all the confidence in the world. I'm not going to predict a sweep, but I'll say Boston in 5.
I'll predict a sweep. I'll say Boston in 4.
All right.
I don't think the Porzingis injury is going to kill them again, especially if Jared Allen misses time in this series, which 50-50 at best. There's no 2-day break at any point in the series, even if it goes 7. I don't think that bodes well for Jared Allen. The recipe for beating Boston, if you're a team like Cleveland or Miami, now, if you're Minnesota or Denver, or I don't know, maybe even the Knicks, there are other ways to beat them. You need to hit 20 plus threes. Unless Boston just has a disaster shooting night, which is possible, you need to do what the Heat did in game 2 and just rain it down from 3. The Cavaliers shot 28% from 3 in the first round against Orlando. Darius Garland looks lost. He has his moments. He has his quarters. He has his halves. He has certainly not looked anywhere the part of a guy who is like borderline 3rd team All NBA conversation. I think the way we think of him when he's healthy, he just hasn't been that dude at all. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell's been fantastic, but it kind of feels like it's just him out there right now. I think Boston has plenty of options. They feel good about throwing on Mitchell, whether it's Derek White, whether it's Holiday, whether it's Tatum, whether it's Brown. I think all those guys can slow down Mitchell to various degrees. I mean, I really think this is a really nice matchup for Boston. I think either team they got here, I think they'd rather play Orlando. Maybe it's like they're more of a nuisance to play just because of how dogged they are on defense, but I think they're the worst team. But either way, they have a perfect path here, I think, to the East Finals and ultimately to the NBA Finals. I don't want to go in on Orlando at all. We'll do that on Wednesday with Brandon. He's much more qualified to talk about them than either of us are. But any other thoughts on the Cavs or the Celtics or the series?
I don't think I have too many overarching thoughts. There's all the talk about Mitchell potentially leaving and then what. I don't even know what to make of what happens with Cleveland here.
Well, that story came out yesterday, a minute before game time or 30 minutes before. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, if they lose, this might be really bad.
Yeah, but so the ironic thing is if you're the Cavs or you're the Cavs organization, this is almost like a free out. You're like, well, we were supposed to lose to Boston. Who was not going to lose to Boston?
Well, and if you're the Cavs, do you allow that to impact your decision making?
I don't think you
like
can.
The Lakers and Denver, I guess, right? Where you're like, well, we would have beat a lot of other teams, but we couldn't beat this team.
I mean, I think it's more. I think the fact that you needed 7 to beat Orlando is more of a concern. And if you can't get 1 against Boston, then that's a conversation, I think. But the organization was probably trending that direction anyway. I mean, what was the scenario based on everything we've heard or haven't heard about Mitchell staying? What was the scenario in which he does stay, in which the fortune changes? Like they go to the NBA Finals and they win.
I think you got to sweep the Celtics.
Yeah, right. So they're sort of, I feel like they're kind of like a dead man walking to some extent.
I wish Mitchell would just put it out there. Like, all right, where's the line? What do we have to do?
Right.
Okay. Mavs-Thunder. Extremely fun series. I'm looking forward to this. We are still trying to identify anybody for the Mavs who's going to give them anything on offense outside of Luka and Kyrie. As a Mavs backer, as someone who's on the record saying that this is a good matchup for them, and I like them to get to the West Finals, we need somebody to step up. I like the fact that they were able to get by the Clippers, with a kind of like a B- series from Luka. You know, had his moments, had his games, but was not fantastic. Kyrie, I think he's back in a big way. I have so much enjoyed being able to sit here and talk to you about Kyrie Irving, the basketball player. And, for so long, if we'd bring him up on a podcast, we always had to say that, this caveat of, well, the off-court stuff and everything that's going on with him. Like, no, I'm so glad we don't have to bring that up. I just like talking about him, the player. He's been unbelievable for them in the playoffs. I still like Dallas here. They're 3.5-point dogs on the road. They don't have home court in this series. If you look at the series price right now, they are slight dogs there too. OKC -120, Dallas +100. I think the experience wins out. I know this is not necessarily a championship pedigree laden Mavs roster, but Luka's played in conference finals before. Kyrie's played in finals before. OKC, I wouldn't say they got a free pass in round one. They played really well. They did what they were supposed to do. That Pelicans team did not show up. They didn't score more than 92 points in any game. They didn't have Zion. They barely had Brandon Ingram. I think much like Indiana, facing a big level up in competition, I think the same might happen here for OKC, even if we have significant questions about Dallas.
Yeah, I think the overarching dynamics of this series are sort of the same as versus the Clippers, where it's like Dallas has the advantage. They have the best player, and they arguably have like the two best players. If you're like Doncic and Kyrie are better than SGA and Jalen Williams, right? But OKC has all the role players that we know can step up. Like the Clippers had a better cast of role players than Dallas. Dallas's role players are a skeleton crew. So in that sense, it's the same. This is a really hard series for me to predict. I understand why you're on Dallas. They have the experience, better player, etc. I think that OKC, the ability for them to put Dort on Kyrie or Doncic is huge. And Jalen Williams is also a great defender. And then the idea of having Chet Holmgren as your floor spacing five, Dallas spent all this capital on Daniel Gafford. And they have Derek Lively, who are both traditional, not perimeter guarding bigs. And Maxi Kleber's hurt now. He's not, I think he's going to miss the entire series, right? Definitely.
At least.
So they don't have their floor spacing smaller option out there. I think it's going to get a little interesting in terms of how they deal with Holmgren out there spacing five, because I think playing Zubac fed right into what Dallas wants to do defensively, which is we have PJ Washington and Gafford and Lively and Kleber, and now they have one less option there.
Well, and it's funny because Zubac kind of killed them throughout that series, right? It's like it should have been a good matchup for them on paper, and like he was arguably like the Clippers' second best player at times. He was in double figures with a few double doubles throughout the series. I think that's a great point. I think that means we see more PJ Washington, because I think he's the guy that has the movement and the versatility to defend Chet Holmgren out there. And Chet at this point is not, he's not a 40% 3-point shooter, so it's kind of like the Miles Turner thing where. I'll be interested to see what's the calculus between we'll give you some of those versus we got to close hard on those. Because if you're willing to concede some threes to Chet Holmgren, I think that opens it up for more Gafford. It opens it up for more Derek Lively. And I think Lively can move around out there. I would trust him, chasing Holmgren out to the perimeter. But I mean, Chet was firing in the first round. Like he took as many threes as any player on the Thunder roster. Ironically, it was him and Lou Dort who took the most threes for the Thunder in round one. So it's something that Dallas has to respect. I think the point you made about Dort is really, really salient. I think he can guard either of those guys seamlessly. I don't know that Dallas necessarily trusts the Luka and Kyrie matchups defensively, although I did think the Clippers, even without Kawhi, would make them pay for that more than they ultimately did. And at times in the series they did, right? Like we saw Luka just, kind of getting clowned by James Harden. I think it was in game 5. But you have Derek Jones. You have PJ Washington, who you trust to some degree. on defense. I do think the Kleber thing is big, not having that shooter for a team that desperately needs shooting. To me, it's going to come down to can Dallas just get a few of those games? Like, can Tim Hardaway come back and have a game where he hits 4 threes off the bench, and maybe that's enough. And conversely, on the OKC side, I think you know what you're getting from SGA. You know what you're getting for Jalen Williams. For the most part, you know what you're getting for Chet Holmgren. And I'll also be interested to see, does Dallas make a point to try to get him in foul trouble? That was not something that New Orleans did at all. He had 9 total fouls in those 4 games. Can Luka, can Kyrie, can they put pressure on Chet, knowing that there's no real backup option at center for the Thunder? All due respect to the other Jalen Williams, but that's a pretty big drop off.
It is. I think they have to force the issue there. I also think this could be a big Case and Wallace series.
Yes.
I'm going to come out on record right now. I think they need him way more in the series than they did in round 1. I think that, I wrote an article about like potential like dynasty league targets in the offseason, and I wrote about Case and Wallace and how I think that there's going to be a shift where they start prioritizing him over Giddey to an extent. And to me, this feels like a series where they need Case and Wallace way more than they need Josh Giddey to deal with Kyrie and Luka. I mean, if they could just throw him out there and you're going to have Dort on Doncic and Case and Wallace and Kyrie. Now, Case and Wallace is a rookie. Like, how well is he really going to do against someone like Kyrie Irving? But that is something I'm definitely going to keep an eye on because I think he'll be huge to the series, actually.
All right, NBA title odds right now. Boston's plus 115. Denver plus 425. Minnesota plus 550. Despite, again, being favored to win that series over Denver right now. That's interesting. OKC plus 850. Dallas 9-1. New York 11-1. Pacers 50-1. Cavs 80-1. If you're a Celtics backer, is now the time. Will we see a lower number than, or a higher number, I should say, than plus 115?
I think it's been the time all year.
Well, it's been the time for a while, yes. But I think, all like coming into the playoffs, it was, well, Philly, if they're healthy, the Bucks, if they get Giannis back, those threats are vanquished. Like, I don't see Boston getting tripped up in the East. So to me, it's like,
no.
Yeah, you wish you had it at 4-1 or 6-1 or 8-1 or whatever, but there's a reason it's plus 115 because I think some of those threats have been eradicated.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think New York could give them problems because New York is a team like New York can struggle sometimes offensively, but they're the exact wrong team to face if you have bad habits, which the Celtics occasionally do have some bad habits.
Sure.
But those are exemplified because they are so good that when they have like one bad game where they phone it in a little more than they should, it feels like the end of the world. But I think it's a deserved plus 115 for the final odds. I would feel 100% comfortable making that bet. Don't feel like that's a throwaway bet. Don't feel like you're, don't feel like too bad about getting essentially even money on that.
I'll say if you like the Timberwolves, by the way, at plus 550, I would just bet Anthony Edwards to win Finals MVP at 7-1 because
way better.
They're not winning the title if Anthony Edwards is not their best player. I can tell you that. I don't really feel compelled to invest in the Karl Anthony Towns Finals MVP market at 35-1. You have to give me a lot more than that. But the Timberwolves are in that discussion, man. Last thing I'll say on this, I was thinking about this last night. We're at the point now with Boston in the East where if they lose this series or the next series, like that would be one of the all-time upsets, right? Especially in recent history. I mean, that would be, to me, almost on par with, Dallas going down to the We Believe Warriors. I know that was a 1-8. And that's on the Pantheon, right? I mean, the Heat have been involved in a couple of these the last few years, but I think Boston is such an overwhelming favorite that if they don't make the finals at this point, it now becomes a catastrophic failure.
They can't lose in the East. I mean, this Porzingis injury gives me a little pause, but mostly it would give me more pause if they were playing New York right now. My eyebrows would be up a little bit more. But no, I think in the East, it's a problem. I mean, if you want to just get really basic and look at like simple rating, throughout the NBA season, they had a 10.8. The next best team in the East was New York at 4.4. So they're like 6 points better than the next best team in their conference on average, which is an insane margin. And I think it bears out when you watch it and just all the talent on the floor. It would be honestly it would be all-time stuff if they did not make it to the NBA Finals.
All right, we got a few more minutes before we head out. I want to touch on the 24-25 industry mock draft that you and I are both taking part in. A bunch of guys from around the industry. Noah Rubin, who's been on the pod, Raphael Johnson, Dan Titus, who's been on our shows from Yahoo. A lot of good guys in this 14-team league, head-to-head 8-cat, I believe, right? I kind of went into this one blind. I just wanted to do a draft. Our guy, Adam King, who does some work for us at RotoWire, put this together. So thank you for that. We are midway through the 4th round out of 12 rounds. So once the draft concludes, we'll tweet the board out, maybe write something up. But I just want to talk about some of the picks, man. It's really interesting especially doing a mock draft this time of year when there's no pressure of like, oh, we got to play this out. It can lead to recklessness in some ways, but I think it makes it more fun. I think you see more, quote unquote risky picks. You see guys, kind of stick with their guys instead of maybe what the consensus or the ADP says. I had the number 1 pick in this draft, and you know where I went. I've been saying it all year. Victor Wembanyama, baby, an easy 1-1 for me. Top of the draft went Wembanyama, Jokic, Doncic, SGA, Halliburton, and then your pick at number 6, Alex, who was
Giannis Antetokounmpo. I will say the interesting thing about you mentioned a lot of reasons doing a mock draft this early is kind of fun and unusual. The Fantrax is hosting it, and they're not set up for next year. Nobody's set up for next year. So you're like looking through the list of players, and it's not really ranked like in a way that it would be. There's no ADP. It's kind of based off of like last year's total data. So you're sort of drafting based off of feel. Like I'm not really like cross-checking rankings or anything, right? Oh, no. It's all based off of feel. But the funny thing is, so my first 3 picks were Giannis, Curry, and Karl Anthony Towns. And, nothing bold there, I don't think. Just a funny observation. I feel like sometimes, like you and I, we do this for a living. We have, all the spreadsheets, data, we project everything. I feel like sometimes I just draft, like if you were to hand my dad the phone and have him do a fantasy draft, and he'd be like, oh, Giannis, first pick. Yeah, great. And then he'd look at the board for round 2. Curry available? Nice. Yeah. Take it. Giannis and Curry on the same team. You see Towns available. It's like, yeah, Karl Anthony Towns, their best player. Sure. Why not? But as that's kind of the way drafts go, right? The more risks people take early, these sort of like established values continue to fall. But I can't remember where I wrote it. But I maybe we talked about it on the podcast. I think the first 2 rounds are going to be all over the place this year because I do feel like we are at an inflection point in terms of the NBA hierarchy where a lot of the old guard is slipping out and a lot of these younger stars are sliding in.
No question. And I think that leads into, some of the guys I wanted to bring up. Kevin Durant, went 14th. He went 1 pick after Scotty Barnes. Somebody took Kyrie at 12, by the way, which is interesting. Defensible, but interesting. I think Paul George is a guy that comes to mind who's got a perfectly on that line. Still a really good player, still a really good fantasy player. He's 34. Do you want Paul George or, do you want someone like Tyrese Maxey who went a handful of picks before him, right? Like the proven commodity versus the guy who, is now putting up similar numbers, but has really only done it for a year and a half. There are a lot of really interesting picks throughout this draft. I don't know if this was an oversight or what, but Joel Embiid went 2-5. He was the 20th overall pick in this draft.
It could have been an oversight. Like I said, the rankings right now are sorted by total. I think they're sorted by total production. He missed a lot of time, so I think he was further down the list.
I know Towns was way down the list too.
But I will say, I think people have probably, I don't want to say they've had it with Embiid. I have not been an Embiid drafting guy. And last year, everybody was on it. They're like, he's finally healthy. He can stay healthy. Didn't happen again this year. Meniscus, other injuries. And I think he will still be a first-round player next year, ADP wise. But I don't know if he's going top 5 anymore. I would be nervous to draft him before the turn.
Yeah. I wouldn't take him top 5. I still think he's going to sneak into the top 5 in terms of ADP. I was shocked by how late he went in this draft. He went 2 picks after Kawhi. It's like if you're making the Kawhi pick there, just take Embiid. Like they'll probably play a similar number of games. Embiid's going to be the better fantasy player. I would imagine the sorting or lack thereof in the draft room was a part of that one. Some other notables, we saw Şengün go at 211. Saw Damian Lillard go at 213. I took Jalen Brunson at the end of round 2, so that would have been the 28th overall pick. Paired him with Wembanyama. And then I went Jared Jackson coming back around at the turn. Didn't feel great about it, but I mean, Jared Jackson didn't have as bad of a fantasy season as it felt like he did because he was on so many of my teams. I'm just kind of hoping that we get a return to normalcy for the Grizzlies. And, now looking back, it's like, all right, if you're getting Jared Jackson at like pick 29, pick 30, if people are kind of backing off of him based on last year, that was almost a worst case scenario outcome as far as how the Grizzlies season went. Jackson basically being shut down at the end. I feel like it can't go that badly again. You kind of like, I haven't totally forgot about Ja Morant. Like, when's the last time we've even talked about Ja Morant on the show, right? Like, the Grizzlies are going to be a totally different team next year. So I actually think there's a buying opportunity on Jaren Jackson because I think there's a pretty good chance he returns to finally being closer to the player he was 2 years ago. And I think the way he played this year and the way it played out, a lot of people are going to drop him in their rankings.
Yeah, I think Jaren Jackson's still a good third round value. I think I prefer to get him in the fourth, but that's only because of persistent injury issues.
Sure.
And I don't know how much he's really developing as a player anymore. You mentioned Lillard, who slipped basically an entire round compared to where he was going this year, which I think is completely deserved.
Yep.
LaMelo Ball went in the middle of the third round. In my opinion, maybe a sorting issue because I still think LaMelo is going to go be a second round guy this year, just in terms of ADP. I think his talent's too high. I think the injuries, I'm not ready to declare him like really injury prone yet. I'm kind of looking at it sideways, but I still think the upside is far too high in terms of his usage rate, in terms of potential to take him in like the middle of the third. The thing is, I would feel like I won. Like, I feel like it's a massive, massive win if I get LaMelo Ball with my third pick in the middle. Like, Adam King drafted him. He went AD, Tyrese Maxey, LaMelo Ball. If I'm King, I'm like, this is amazing. Amazing draft.
Yeah, and again, I think in a mock, it's a little bit easier to just say, oh, LaMelo Ball, third round. I don't have to live with the results, right? But yeah, I wouldn't say he's going to be on my do not draft list because there's a point at which I'll take any player, but it's going to have to be late in round 2, I think, before I start making that decision. I think he is injury prone at this point. I don't know what the reason is for it. I don't know if it's his body. I don't know if it's the shoes. I don't know if it's the Charlotte medical staff or whatever it is, but I mean, the fact that he's had like basically these same injuries over and over these last couple of years, it's concerning. And I also don't think Charlotte's going to be a markedly better team. I think they could be a little bit better than they were last year. We'll see what, kind of Miles Bridges, hopefully putting all this off court stuff behind him, Brandon Miller taking a step forward. They'll add another lottery pick, but how many teams are they really leapfrogging, right? Like, I think they could be a team that's kind of stuck in this like Utah Jazz loop where it's like, all right, yeah, sometimes they look okay, but even if LaMelo stays healthy, do you trust him to be playing meaningful basketball games and not be sitting out games down the stretch?
Completely fair question. I think, again, this was something I sort of experimented with last year. I don't think I stuck to it as much as I should have, but just like completely avoiding players who are going to be in like the projected bottom 6 teams. Yeah. Just like don't even draft with them unless it's like after pick 10 or something. Until you get to your bench, just completely avoiding those situations, because they just screw you, and they are, to some extent, they are predictable. And there are some guys like LaMelo. I understand why you're off, because it's like, not only do we have, like, you might think he's injury prone, which is fine, and then they could also be bad. And there's a couple guys around the league who are going to be in that same situation, like on terrible teams who are also injury prone. And it's like, we should probably knock those guys down at least a round, maybe 2 rounds, just because of like the sort of unknown and mostly downside surrounding them.
Saw Jalen Johnson go at pick 36. So late in round 3. Again, this was a 14-team league. Is that about right for him? Does that feel a little aggressive? Another guy who battled some injuries, benefited from some injuries on that team, but also broke out in a pretty big way.
He finished 48th per game last year. And I don't think Atlanta is going to be. It seems more likely, based on buzz, that Atlanta is going to be getting worse rather than getting better in terms of like trade market. I don't think they're making any waves in free agency. Do they even have the money to do so? And Johnson, I mean, regardless of what they do, Johnson's their third best player. I think arguably, some people might say Bogdan, or I don't think so. So if Atlanta continues to be good. I think he's on his floor of like 40, in the 40s for fantasy. And if they tank and he becomes their second best player, then you're in a really good spot. So I think drafting him in the third is I really don't have any problems with that.
Kobe White early in the fourth round. He went at 4.4. So if a noted non-math guy, I'm so used to doing like the 12 team calculations, that would make him pick 46, I think, overall. Kobe White inside the top 50. Are we buying it?
I might not go that high for him. He finished like 89th per game this year. He did start off slow. I'm sure if you take away the first like month and a half of his season, it looks way better. But honestly, at the end of the season, the numbers are 37 minutes a game. So it's not, he was out there. And LaVine is coming back. And I really have no idea what's going to go on with LaVine. My only issue with taking White, not my only issue, but part of the reason I wouldn't want to necessarily take White that high is, yes, I think he could get better. I also think there are just so many other players in that 50 range, 40 to 50 range, who we know are 40 to 50 value players. Like we just know. And that's where I would rather go. Like Jalen Duren goes right before him. And Mikal Bridges goes after him. Butler goes after him. Zion Williamson goes after him. I get why all those guys went after. I think it's hard to say whether I'd rather want Zion or Kobe White. Because of Zion is such a nebulous value. It's like, what are we even talking about when we talk about Zion's value? So yeah,
it's become an existential question.
It is. It's not a question of numbers anymore.
He played so well down the stretch. It's like I could kind of see myself getting suckered back in. A really interesting stretch of players to begin round 4, right? I mean, a lot of question marks, a lot of guys who underperformed this past year. We're 7 picks into round 4, and it went Morant, Vucevic, Duren, Kobe White, Mikal Bridges, Jimmy Butler, Zion. I mean, what a run. I don't know if I'd feel great taking any of those guys. I do still like Duren. Like he to me was able to kind of insulate himself from the disaster that was the Pistons. And I think Detroit's going to be really bad again next year. And you and I have talked a lot about just trying to avoid those dumpster fire situations and how it usually ends up creating more trouble than it's worth for fantasy. Vucevic, I don't know, man. He's probably going to still be on the Bulls. What are you going to do? It's like I'd probably rather just take Zion at this point. Like I just can't. I don't have the stomach to roster Vooch. But the Kobe White thing is defensible if you think one, LaVine is either not going to be the same guy, they move him. I don't know what team's interested in him at this point, or you think DeRozan's not coming back. Which there were some rumors out there that they were trying to work out a new deal with DeRozan. Again, I don't know why. The Bulls they want to be the 8 seed so badly, I guess. But if DeRozan and or LaVine aren't back next year, like I think one of them could come back and Kobe White could still be that guy. If they're both back and they just like try to replay it with like the 2023 Bulls, then I don't think Kobe White's a top 50 guy.
The Bulls are addicted to the play-in, and it's alarming. I'm with you on the Pistons. I don't know what the move is that would make them good unless they manage to sign somebody, and I don't know who that person is. And the nice thing about Duren, at least, I mean, of course, like he's at risk to get shut down like anybody else. But when you're a big man and your thing is you mostly rebound and dunk the ball, like that is pretty stable. Like it's just, I mean, it's the most stable role you can have, regardless of team success. I just don't know what you do if you're Detroit, because I think, and this is the problem, I think, with team building for young teams. And people talk about this with Orlando, right? Who is Orlando signed now? That's like a big topic. Does Orlando get Paul George? Does Orlando get whoever? And I think Detroit's in a tough spot because I think ideally in their plans, they want Cade to be their number one option. He is their best player. But and as soon as you try to sign somebody better than Cade Cunningham to make your team better, you start messing with the hierarchy of your young guys. Like you're messing with his confidence. You're changing the timeline. You're taking his shots away. And then you're taking shots away from Jaden Ivey. It's like, is he supposed to be your number 2 guy? I think Asar Thompson had a good year. I don't know why this turned into a Pistons podcast. I think Asar Thompson had a really fun, interesting, good year, but the man cannot shoot a basketball. So it's like, okay, well, now you're playing it with Jalen Duren. Can you even do that? And we're going to start asking the same questions about Asar Thompson that we do about Ben Simmons, which isn't fair. But it's look, I mean, they played 31 guys this year. All right. I mean, they just I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do.
All right. Before we get out of here, can you just give us like 6 minutes on Simone Fontecchio?
Do they know that he is not 22? Do they know that? That is my main question.
Man. Yeah. I don't know how we got from, I don't know if Kobe White's a top 50 guy to breaking down the Pistons roster and Asar Thompson's development, but that's what you're going to get here on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Pod. You and I will be back next Monday. We'll keep us, we'll obviously update everything that's happened between now and then in the playoffs. We'll keep you updated on this mock draft. We'll touch on it on Wednesday as well when I'm hosting with our guy, Brandon Kravitz. We'll give you, I don't know how many picks we're going to have at that point. The clock is like 7 hours per pick. So I don't know, doing the math, we'll have like at least 10 more picks, hopefully by that time. But we'll keep you posted. We'll eventually, post the full results from that draft. If you're curious, if you want to see some of these early season values from a lot of guys who've been paying attention to this in the industry, go check out Prize Picks. Use our code ROTOPOD, ROTOPOD. If you're playing on Prize Picks, first deposit match up to $100. Alex, fun times as always, man. I'll talk to you in a few hours over on SiriusXM NBA. You can hear us on the RotoWire NBA show tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern.